Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the EdUp AI Podcast. I'm Jason Gulia, and in this podcast, we're really thinking a lot about AI in education, and not just how to do it and these sort of tutorials, but also what it means for education, what it means for college, what it means for society. And I'm really excited today because I get to talk to Reem Jaafar, who I've interacted with a lot online, but this is the first time I get to actually meet her and talk to her. And so Reem is a faculty of math at LaGuardia Community College. So welcome, Reem. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jason. How are you?
I'm good. The semester is crazy. I mean, for us, we're like right around the
relate.
midterm. So yeah, it's true. Anyway, so one of the reasons that I was so keen to talk to you is because you actually have experiences with AI and assessment. And I think that when many of us read about it, using AI to actually assess student work, we think in these very abstract ways. We look at the research, we think about, X, Y, and Z, but there are so few instances where people have talked about and written about the actual experience of AI and assessment. So if you could just give our listeners a little bit of information about what your experience was like and what you took away from it.
Sure. So as you know, I teach math. So the first thing folks are going to ask, oh, is she using AI to grade her math homework? No, I am not. I'm going to be talking quickly about institutional assessment and just give some words of cautions, but also how it's being currently used, because I also work with higher education organizations that are focused on assessment. And then I want to talk to you about my experiences being a student, because I'm a lifelong learner and I was in a program related to, let's just put it, I was in a program where it was writing intensive. And I want to focus my experience more there. But first of all, for institutional assessment practitioner, there are a lot of innovation that could happen in AI there. There are, for example, institutions who, if they're able to navigate the ethical concerns of sharing their data, they can actually train the system based on their institutional data model. And from it, they can conduct predictive analytics, they could do projections, they could even program it for various reasons that are related to student success or whatever their institutional goals are. And this is very important to note. I'm not saying this is good or bad, but some institutions have started exploring this on day one. And some of them have been able to reduce their costs. Some of them, for example, they have trained the AI based on the way they used to train. They used to pay a third-party provider to train their students for interviews for jobs based on the major they had. So if you're able to navigate the ethical concerns in terms of where is your data being stored, who has access to it, do you have an enterprise relationship, with OpenAI, then this is good. The experience that I wanted to focus on is because, I've been a faculty for 15 years. And when you've been a faculty for so long, sometimes you think you could put yourself in the student shoes, but really you cannot unless you're a student yourself. And so I've been doing some programs for credit outside of my school, of course, graduate school, just, as a lifelong learner. I do have some interest. CUNY is very generous, to give us tuition credit. So, I've been using that. And so I've been writing a lot with my classes because my original background is in STEM, but now I'm more interested, in institutional transformation, change management. So I learned things that are of interest to me. So in the program that I was in, for the majority of part, as a student who has a strong background, I was interacting with students from diverse backgrounds because this was not a discipline-specific graduate program. I was in a graduate program that basically speak to diverse interests of faculty, staff, and even folks from outside higher ed. They were doing it for fun. And what I've realized, given the diverse background of each one of us, there was always a room for improvement, but that was constructive and that basically leveraged our background. So for example, I'm a STEM faculty. My professors in general were able to take the STEM background and my areas of strength, knowing how to, do scholarly research and how to tie it to, for example, institutional implementation of the actions I wanted to implement and really take it to the next level. Same thing from friend, for example, who worked in a completely different background. For example, I had a classmate who was a flight attendant, not a STEM faculty. It's the same idea. And in between, you had folks in other industries. And this was, for me, the human aspects of giving students feedback. And it was not just constructive. It was, I could argue, transformative in the way you could see the feedback to your peer who works, on an airline versus you who's actually on the ground with students. And then develop action plan and also see how the practices vary across different industries. Now, there was a class where a majority of us felt that the feedback we were given was actually redundant and similar, despite carrying backgrounds similar to the one I explained. Very different background, even different ages, different years of experiences. And this occurred over the course of semester. So I'm going to share with you here some of the pitfalls that I think could be the results of the usage of AI to giving students feedback, especially when the course is based on writing assignments, reading and writing. And I'm going to start by, if a course relies heavily on discussion boards, for example, even if you put a rubric in it and you say this is the assignment asks the student. So even if you give the AI some context, what ends up happening, and this is the results of comparison of multiple feedback given to multiple classmates in the same class, the discussion board feedback still would seem a bit vague, and the guidance on how to improve it is to a certain extent useless. And I'll tell you what I mean by useless in a second. On my first week, for example, or early in the week, you'll get some feedback that reads, okay, good, your assignment explained XYZ, and I'm going to give folks some of the keyword that AI generally overuses when it's giving feedback. I have a list here. But the idea is on the first week, it gives you something, and then it tells you, well, if you want to take the step further, you could include fill in the blank what the assignment was about. And then the next week, you try, okay, you know what? I talked about XYZ. Last week, the professor wanted me to include something else. Let me be creative and include that something else. Only then to get a response, two types of responses in general. Like the answer is too long, it's about the quality, not the length. Or, for example, you had something like, in order to elaborate on point X, you could include. So there's always something to be included. The question is this a generic suggestion or it's based on the assignment and the experience of the student sharing that discussion board? And so what ends up happening is for a group of students in the class, the feedback sounds the same. And it sounds more like copy pasting with just differences in some of the details. And so, for example, I'll tell you some of the repetitive keywords and phrases that were always there. Great job outlining, fill in the blank, the rest. You correctly cited sources, which helps identify, fill in the steps. To take this further, you could expand. This is always the ending of most of the feedback. To take this further, you could expand on. The breakdown of this topic is concise and well explained. That's always the start. Another thing where it seems it's never enough is comments like adding more recent example or statistics. So sometimes you are given statistics using certain data sources, which could be 5 years old, 10 years old, to use in your discussion board. But then when AI tries to grade it, and then you input your own materials in it, it starts complaining that the data is old, even though this is you as a faculty requiring your students to actually use that data. And so this is where the human aspect is very important, because it takes away, when I was first hired, for example, one of the questions that I used to be asked, how do you individualize instruction in math? And I think the same is true for other disciplines. And my fear is, if you just simply trust AI to generate those types of assessment for a student with such a vast background and who brings in different skills, you're really not just individualizing instruction, but you're also not giving individual feedback that is helpful. Yes, anybody could give real life example in any for any problem. More actionable solution is another buzzword that AI keeps generating. Yes, anybody could add more actionable solution, but was it really helpful for the learning goals of that particular assignment? And so at some point, I came to the realization, because in my early years, I taught a lot of developmental math when they were very relevant in community colleges. After that, we redesigned co-requisite math courses. And so I remember when I learned about the growth mindset and deficit versus asset-based mindsets, when you're just using AI to give these blanketed suggestions, you give the students an impression that you're approaching them from a deficit and not from an asset mindset. These were, for me, some of the main highlights. I do have concerns for writing assignments as a non-native English speaker. I speak English very well, but I'm a non-native English speaker. And if you're a faculty working with students whose English is a second or third language, the AI model right there is biased against them.
Right.
And so I remember, Jason, you're very keen on, and I agree with you, on having students sometimes improve and rewrite and do better. This principle of continuous improvement. I'm really scared that the overusage of AI in just creating those assessments will just push the students to maybe go use AI to fix the assessments in a way that may not necessarily align properly with the goals of the assignments. If it's quickly fixing the punctuations, I get it. So these were some of the main highlights that I felt as a student were very generic, but also to a certain extent looked at me as a deficit person, not as a person with 15 years of experience teaching in STEM.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And thank you so much for talking about that in terms of having this very personal experience with AI and assessment, because I think that you're right. For many of us, we fall victim to thinking that we're very good at empathizing with students, and we try really hard to do that. But to a certain extent, we can't. We have these empathy gaps for various reasons because of our position or experience or knowledge or whatever. And there are a couple of things that you mentioned that I think are so key for this conversation. One has to do with personalization. I think that this idea that AI could be used to personalize feedback and personalize instruction has completely taken off, right? And this has really been, it goes back way before ChatGPT, but really when ChatGPT becomes widely available, it takes off even more. And there's actually very little rigorous conversation about what does that personalization look like? Is that actually desirable? How is that shaped? How is that not shaped? And one of the things that I think is so interesting about what you mentioned with this personal experience is that, especially in certain hands and with certain approaches, personalization becomes generic very, very quickly, right? There's actually sometimes very hard to divide those two. So I think that's very, very key. And then another worry that I have with AI-powered assessment is, and I'd be very keen to hear if you can talk about whether this seems to be accurate or consistent with your own experience, but that students tend to reciprocate. Right? They tend to mirror, right? And so one of my worries is that if you're a student and you go into a class and you see that they are giving you AI generated assessment, right? They're using AI to not just give you a grade, but give you feedback, whether it's formative or summative or whatever. But if I were a student, right, not to project myself into it too much, if I were a student, my immediate response is, then why am I doing it, right? If I'm going to get AI generated feedback, I'm going to give you AI generated assignments, right? That's where my mind immediately goes. Now, does that dynamic seem to be consistent with what you thought, that as people sort of started to see, oh, this is AI generated, did they immediately go like, well, then I'm just going to generate it with AI? Was that dynamic a part of it, or did you see something different happen?
So the answer is yes, but I'll tell you why we have not used AI. As one side effect of this problem was it killed our creativity, because we were constantly second guessing ourselves and we were scared to take risk. Having said this, and this is an open question to all institutions, all faculty governance are very keen on having an AI policy focused on students and has, the lack of academic integrity in the back of mind. But I've never heard any governance bodies on any institution raise the issues about the usage of AI amongst faculty. I mean, there was a joke early in the days of ChatGPT that all the moral indignation of faculty have gone the minute they figured they could use it for a letter of recommendation. But that's a joke, of course. So the idea is, one of the reasons we have not used AI ourselves as a pushback is basically it was in clear conflict with the academic integrity guideline that we had to abide to. But I could see where a student who's not aware of these guidelines definitely says, yeah, you give me AI, I give you AI back. And I think it takes us back to why we teach. I mean, one of the reasons why I teach, you said it's the human aspect. It's me working with students. And again, some days it's raining, some days it's rainbow. It's a process, especially when you're teaching, non-traditional students. But of course, it's very rewarding. And I feel this interaction, is very important in co-constructing sometimes even assignments. And even sometimes you've got students who actually give you a good feedback on, this was my experience with the assignment that is very helpful with you as a faculty to improve it. So if we really now make it the job of AIs now, I'm afraid we're all going to be replaced by avatars, students and faculty. So this is why it was important for me, like why I'm a student, why I'm a faculty, because I want to learn and interact from faculty expertise too. And that's, for me, begs to the bigger questions. When faculty are just going to use AI to generate feedback, it may have its usage, its constraint, but at the end of the day, faculty are scholars. And some of the reasons, we're in higher ed, we want to be able to share that expertise and scholarly lens with others. And to put it simply, AI will not be able to do that in an individualized way.
That's so key. And I think it's missing from the larger conversation. One of the things that's really sort of confused me in terms of how people talk about AI and assessment is that you will often see this divide, that people will say you can use AI to assess student work and give feedback so that you can create more space for doing the teaching, doing the human interaction. And that is extremely weird to me, because the assessment is part of the human interaction. That is part of it. I literally went through over the last couple of days and was looking at student assignments and reading their work. And I would write things like, and legitimately, I hadn't thought of it like that before, or this is sort of interesting, it makes me think of this, right? Sometimes it was just like for feedback, whether it's formative or summative. Sometimes it was conversational. And I think I really, really worry that when we create that divide, when we say, the assessment is done by a machine, and then the quote unquote human to human interaction is done by the human, I don't know why we're so quick to say the assessment part isn't the human to human interaction. I actually think that is an essential part of it. Because if I'm going to think about what I want, say I do something, say I create something, whatever it is, and then I get feedback and I have to think about how to improve it, having a human there as support seems to be pretty pivotal, at least as far as I'm understanding. I don't use AI for assessment at all, and I'm very, very worried about it. And so I did have a question for you.
Sure.
And I do have to wrap up
Sure,
just
sure.
in a few minutes.
I'll be
But
brief. I'll be brief.
oh yeah, so and you may have a direct answer to this, you might not. But so do you think there is, in this instance, there was an issue with AI generated feedback, just like on its own? Is that the issue? Or is the issue how this particular class, this particular professor did it? So if they improved it, if they did a better job of the personalization, which you could probably do, move away from, with some good prompting, move away from the generic feedback. Would you be on board with it, or do you think that we should be just skeptical of AI generated feedback in total?
I'm a scientist, so I do have a bit of skepticism, but I also think transparency is a good approach. So if you're a faculty who's thinking to use it and you're refining your methods, I think it's good to be transparent with the students and even showing them how you're using it and why you're still the mentor and the expert and the coach for them throughout the semester. But you can't just give it there out of context. I do think it has a place as long as, faculty are transparent with students, how it's being used, why it's being used, and that it's not a replacement. And also, it would definitely need that element of expertise that still individualizes to a certain extent your background, because the AI does not know I'm a faculty with 15 years in STEM and I've turned in these many assignments and I've done this kind of work, nor does it know about my other friend who worked 30 years in a certain industry. So that it would definitely still need the human plug-in. And I think, it could work if the faculty is able to have a hybrid approach, but also be very transparent and open about it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And gets us to the question, not the question, I guess, the topic of academic integrity again. Because I think you're right. I think a lot of institutions have this split between how students can use it and how faculty can use it. That, if you look at those statements about academic integrity or, AI and academic integrity policies, depending on how they put it, it's all very much based off of student cheating. That's the focus. 99% of the time, that is the framing of the entire thing. And it's very little about what it means to act positively with integrity from a student side and a faculty side. And I understand that student and faculty are different. It doesn't necessarily have to do the same thing. But I do think that, again, I think humans in general, not all of us, but there is this reciprocating nature, and students reciprocate all the time. They want to mirror it, right? And so one of the best ways to kind of get them to act with integrity is to show them what that looks like and say, this is what it means to be transparent. This is what it means to be open with it. And that if you have the situation where students have to then talk to each other and kind of with some sleuthing and which you're looking for clues, figure out gradually that, oh, this is AI generated. That's a problem, right? That is an issue, because effectively you're right that you're not really showing integrity, you're not really being transparent, you're not doing the things we ask our students to do. And even if it's not a requirement, I tend to fall on the side of it's probably a good idea because we need models, right? We need to have as many models as we can, because in many ways this whole thing is uncharted territory, and any sort of guidance, even if it's just seeing what it can look like, can be really, really helpful. And we are out of time, so thank you, Reem, so much for coming and talking to me and talking about your experience. And again, I think this is essential. I think talking to people who've actually been on the receiving end of AI assessment is so important and rarely talked about. So thank you for coming in and sharing your perspective.
Jason, thank you so much. Take care.
You too.